This episode is presented by Recovery Centers of Montana.
If you or someone you know is struggling, getting help shouldn't feel out of reach.
Recovery Centers of Montana offers care across 6 locations, including inpatient facilities and outpatient clinics.
Step away from the noise and focus on getting your life back on track.
Learn more by calling 701-401-3000.
That's 701-401-3000.
Hi, I'm Megan Invick with Americans for Prosperity North Dakota. One of the cornerstones of our Road to Opportunity agenda is tax relief, because North Dakotans deserve to keep more of what they earn. That's why we're advocating for the elimination of the state income tax, along with meaningful property tax relief tied to responsible local spending. Learn more about the Road to Opportunity and our plan to eliminate the state income tax at afpnd.org.
This episode is presented by the Blue Rider.
Check out the Blue Rider in downtown Minot for a laid-back vibe and outdoor patio and 16 beers on tap.
They've got live music, trivia nights, and one of the deepest record collections around.
Plus fair prices, friendly faces, late-night favorites like grilled cheese and pizza.
The Blue Rider, serving Minot since 1994.
Good drinks, good music, good people.
The North Dakota oil and natural gas industry works here, and works here, and here, and even works here, by creating 60,000 jobs statewide and generating billions of tax dollars annually to support our infrastructure, flood protection projects, and our schools. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities.
Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk. Our guest that we're going to be talking about, it's a very interesting issue in Fargo. And it's interesting to me because several years ago in the city of Minot, we actually moved away from the ward system. We went to an at-large system of city government where all the city council members, we call ours a council, all the city council members are elected at large from the city, which means basically if you live in the city of Minot, you can run for council. And previously we had wards, and those wards, obviously it split the city up into jurisdictions, and then we elected people from each wards. And I think we had like 7 wards, and we were electing 2 people from each ward. And I got to tell you, I supported at the time moving to the at-large system because I thought we had too damn many members of the city council. And it was creating problems. I regret that a little bit now. I think we maybe overcorrected. I think we probably went too far in the other way. And now I kind of wish we had the ward system back, and maybe the better solution was maybe fewer wards and maybe just elect one person from each ward. I think that's maybe the better way. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing that up is because Fargo's about to have this debate. Our guest is Arlette Preston. She's a former member of the city government, just recently. Former member, because we held an election. And also she is a representative for Fargo Wards for Equal Representation, and that's what they want to do. The Fargo City Commission is currently at large. The proposal that Arlette and her group, they just submitted, I think, nearly 5,000 petitions. About 4,500 of them were approved. That's more than enough to get the question on the ballot for the city of Fargo. So what the Fargo voters are being asked is, do you want to go, what I think is back, right? Fargo in the past wasn't always at large, were they? When's had wards?
It's been this since 1913, as far as I know.
Really? Oh, wow. Okay. Well, learning something new. Arlette, tell us about your proposal. What specifically does it do?
So it would establish 6 wards and 1 person elected from each ward. The candidate would have to live inside the ward and be elected by people in the ward. So it would also change from a commission form of government to a council form, which that will remove the commissioners as they are currently assigned certain portfolios and daily interactions with certain departments, it would remove them from that and allow for the city administrator to actually have direct oversight. So those are the two major changes.
Arlette, the most important thing I'm going to do during this interview is wish you a happy birthday. We're recording
Oh,
on we're recording on Wednesday. This will come out on Friday. And to be honest, Arlette, I didn't know it was your birthday until my wife texted me before this interview and said, "Hey, you're having Arlette on. Make sure you wish her happy birthday." Good staff work by Aaron, as always.
I'm sure Aaron loves being called our staff too.
Yeah, I assure you, I do far more staff work for her than she does for me. So, Arlette, one of the things that has sort of come up about this proposal is potential increased cost. The now former mayor came out with some numbers that were sort of off the wall from my perspective. Can you talk about what this change would mean in terms of for taxpayers? Would this be a huge increase in the budget, or just can you talk a little bit about the cost?
yeah, for sure. I have no idea where he got his numbers, and he never really specified where they came from. What we have projected are there would be 2 additional people on the council versus what is currently the commission. So there'd be a total of 7 people, including the mayor, versus now it's 5. So those 2 additional people would add probably around 80,000 total in salary and benefits for 2 of them. That would be an annual cost. The only other expense really is the special election. And I truly don't know what that's going to be. I understand from the city, the county is unwilling to contract to run this election because it's so close to the general election in November. They feel like they don't have the staff. So it's going to be a little bit of a headache, I think, for the city to do that, but it's required by state law. It's not something that we had any choice over. It has to be a special election. So that cost is just a one-time cost. Otherwise, there might be a little bit of staff time for the boundary setting committee. Minor changes like with the putting name tags up on doors, those kinds of things, business cards, minor little costs there. Mainly 80, maybe 100,000 at the most.
When is the election?
It has not been set yet. The city has 60 to 90. It has to be set within 60 to 90 days once the signatures have been certified. And that was done last Thursday. So the latest they could set this would be around October 6th and somewhere's in there.
It is. And is that why? Because the law requires the election no further than 90 days out. Is that why we couldn't put it on the November ballot?
Yes. And also the state law requires it to be a special election.
So
with
we
the
couldn't.
only issue on the ballot.
Okay,
Yeah.
so regardless of the timing, we couldn't put it on the general election ballot. That's disappointing because you're not going to get the same turnout for a special election
No,
that you would for
and
the general.
that is a concern of ours, and we're going to work really hard on trying to get the vote out. Yeah.
So one of the other things is one of the other arguments people make is that you could, under the current system, because all of the commissioners are essentially your commissioners. And I think that's true anyway. I mean, I think the legislature operates like that. I don't really know of a lot of lawmakers who are all that concerned if a constituent calls them with the pressing concern, whether they specifically live. Maybe some are. I think they're more concerned about like in-state, out-of-state. I think they're less concerned about what somebody from Wyoming thinks. But anyway, I guess one of the arguments I've heard made for the current system is that you can call any commissioner because they all represent you. Whereas if you go to a ward system, the other commissioners from wards that you don't live in may be less willing to take your call or to listen to you. How do you respond to that?
I think it's true also with a council form, just like you said with a legislature. Most council members are going to respond. However, I think what this allows is to make sure that somebody does advocate for you. Right now, when communications come into the commission, it goes to all 5 people. Because of open meeting laws, you can't communicate amongst each other, so you don't know who's responding and whether they're following through on it. It gets to be kind of a little bit of a mess sometimes. Granted, there are a number of us who did respond to all emails, but there were commissioners that didn't as well. It It really, I think, establishes a stronger sense of accountability to the constituents.
Arlette, how does this transition work? Obviously, Chad Peterson and Nikki Gullickson were just elected to 4-year terms in June. We have the sitting folks right now. What does that transition look like from the 5 folks that are there at large to these 6 districts moving?
Yeah. So if this passes, all 5 will have to, I'm sorry, all 4 will have to run. The mayor is exempted from running again because that's always and will continue to be an at-large position. So the 4 commissioners, current commissioners, would have to run within their ward. So if some of them happen to be in the same ward, depending on where those boundaries are set, they'd have to run against each other. Once those wards are set, and the election would not happen until the next city election. So it won't happen until June of 28.
So we're not going to have a second, like a second special election.
No, it would be the regular primary city election in June of 28. And there would be 3 that would run for 2-year terms and 3 that would run for 6-year or a 4-year term. Sorry. So there'd be staggered terms beyond that.
One thing we actually asked Mayor Boucher, we had him on the podcast shortly after the election, and we asked him about this proposal. And he seemed generally, I guess, can't remember if we asked him specifically if he supports it or not, but he seemed generally supportive. And one of the points he made is that, you know, sometimes in Fargo politics, you see a lot of focus on certain parts of the city. I think the example he brought up is a lot of focus on downtown. Well, other parts of Fargo have issues too. And he argued that maybe having apportioned representation like this would allow those, because now you have who your job is if you don't represent a ward that touches downtown's not really your purview. You're maybe it's the opposite of the call any commissioner argument. The other argument is, well, now if you live in a certain part of Fargo, you really have a voice for that part of Fargo who can bring those. Comment on that a little bit. How do you see that working?
Yeah. You know, the most common issue that I heard when I was on the commission was that people on the southwest side of town did not feel like their concerns were being heard or they didn't have a voice, and that there was a lot of focus on downtown. So this would definitely, at least it would establish greater accountability for at least one person within their ward to make sure that their issues are on the table and that they're addressed. So, you know, this is not going to be a panacea for everything by any means, but it's a step towards increased accountability and better communication with your elected representative. And frankly, if that person doesn't respond to you, it's easier to get them unelected to replace them. So that sense of accountability should be stronger.
So Arlette, you sort of mentioned that the direct work between the city commissioners and the maybe department heads and that kind of thing would be more limited under this proposal, that the city administrator would become more of that direct person. Any concern with the city administrator being an unelected bureaucrat and getting far more power? Or would they get far more power? Or is it can you just talk through that, how that will work in practicality?
Sure. So currently the mayor really is just a member of the commission, has 3 or 4 departments in his or her portfolio. So the mayor truly becomes the CEO of the entire structure. So the administrator and the mayor would be working closely together. Now, what was happening with the commission form, and I'll give you a good example. One of the departments I had in my portfolio literally had to get buy-in from 5 different people before she could advance something to the commission level. It was very inefficient, very ineffective, and the city administrator just wasn't in the middle of that conversation oftentimes because what's happening between the commission and the department head. So it left the city administrator and the mayor outside those discussions. That would hopefully not happen.
So if we go to apportionment, that means drawing district boundaries. We see that certainly at the state level, at the national level, where redistricting becomes a very ugly political football at times. So how to explain how that process works for Fargo? Who does it? How often does it happen? And what's it based on?
So it would be happening with census changes, just like reapportionment with
every 10 years?
Yeah.
Could it happen more? I mean, because we've seen this all of a sudden is now we're seeing lines getting redrawn like right after elections in between census. Would that be possible under this policy?
That's a good question, which I don't know the answer to. It surprised the heck out of me that it was happening nationally.
I didn't think it was possible nationally till they started doing it.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan, whether it's Democrats in California or Republicans in Texas.
Yep.
Not a fan. Don't like that.
No, I'm not either. So the ballot language actually requires a boundary setting committee, and that committee would be appointed by the city commission, but it was clear. We clarified very well that it can't be elected officials. So we tried to remove it from the political arena a bit, and we'll just have to watch closely who gets appointed and the process they go through to make sure that it's fair. Now, the requirements inside the ballot language is that it needs to be equal population and that the boundaries need to be contiguous. It's not a whole lot of guidance there, but it will be the political pressure of watching the process closely, and we plan to do that.
Arlette, who's all involved in trying to pass this thing when we finally get the election? I mean, I think it's been a pretty nonpartisan, bipartisan group of leaders, but how about in terms of like the chamber and some of those other organizations? Is there support from those groups?
We plan to actually sit down with the chamber. Since it's a metro-wide chamber, I don't know how much they will get involved in a local, just one jurisdiction issue here, but we plan to reach out to them and at least inform them about the change in what we're doing. There really has been wide support across all political ideologies, and we could really see that with the door-to-door that we were doing. Every kind of household, whether wealthy or not so wealthy, were very supportive. So I would say probably 9 out of 10 wanted to sign the petition. So it was actually really solid support out there.
One of the arguments, I know we brought up former mayor Tim Mahoney's argument about cost, where he said that this is going to cost significantly more, and you addressed that. Another thing he brought up is that it's going to create a weak mayor, where the mayor under this system would only vote as a tiebreaker. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I don't know how many times I tried to.
I feel like Arlette, as a former council member, is like, don't threaten me with a good time. I like the idea of a weak mayor, maybe.
So actually, state law, when you look at the verbiage, actually defines this as a strong mayor position. And the reason is, yes, that person will not vote on every issue unless it's a tiebreaker. But the biggest issue is that it has veto power. That veto power needs to be considered by council members as they bring issues forward. So along with it removes the commissioners from daily operational oversight with the departments and clearly identifies the accountability for managing the structure by the mayor and then the city administrator. So, Fargo is 140,000 with close to 2,000 employees. It's so important in my mind to have an accountable party that can be held accountable for decisions that are being made or mistakes that are made. And right now with the commission, it's pretty diluted. It's hard to figure out who's accountable, and a strong mayor position would actually help, I think.
So just one follow up on that. You would say that this proposal would tell, even though the mayor would only vote in tiebreakers during commission meetings, he would be stronger because he or she would take on more. It's currently a he or she would take on more administrative responsibilities. Is that what you're saying essentially? Also,
that person would have veto power over the council. Now, it can be overturned with 2/3 of the council, but on the policy level, that person, would have quite a bit of power.
So, Arlette, I'm thinking about, obviously, I live in Bismarck, and during city elections, at-large city seats, there are pockets of our community where there's much higher turnout, right? There's much higher turnout in more affluent areas, and often our city council is all people from the north side of Bismarck. And so I'm thinking if we had this similar system here, it might actually lead to a more economically, maybe racially diverse city commission. Are you hoping that's one of the things that comes out of this, that maybe it's some different type of people are able to step up and serve on the city leadership?
Yeah, definitely. It makes it much easier for somebody to run and actually win, because right now with at large, with a population again of 140,000, you really have to run radio ads, billboards. It's expensive and it's really tough unless you come into the race with lots of name recognition. This would allow for someone who's an unknown to work hard, go door to door, and get to know the neighbors as well as the neighbors getting to know them. Now, the other thing, city elections typically in Fargo, they run 9%, 10% turnout. It's crazy. So hopefully with someone who's running door to door, people would get more engaged with what's happening at the city level, and hopefully the turnout will go up. Now, I don't know that that's the case, but hopefully it will happen. And yes, it will allow for people who may not be exposed in the media a whole lot to actually win.
What about the residency requirements? Because at the state level, I know for the legislature, it's a little loosey-goosey. In fact, we saw during the primaries, we saw Judy Estenson. Now, she's a former state senator. She was not necessarily happy with some of the court rulings about redistricting at the state level, where she said she was running for the primary in District 15, despite the fact she didn't live there. Now, she can do that, and to my surprise, she could be on the ballot for the primary, because the only requirement under state law is that she be a resident of that district on election day. So how does that work for the city of Fargo for residency? Is there an additional residency policy, or are you just resorting to the state standard?
I would assume it'll probably resort to the state law. Everything about this election has been driven by state law. So it probably, and again, I don't know the answer to that one, but assuming that it probably would resort to state law. The city, and I believe in the ballot language, we just have a 30-day residency requirement. Now, whether that means election day or getting on the ballot.
Well, residency, because you're a resident after 30 days. So being a resident on election day means you have to have lived there for 30 days before election day is what that means.
Yeah.
Essentially. Yeah. Just to be clear.
So, Arlette, you talking about Fargo being 140,000 people. I mean, essentially, the city commissioners in Fargo are representing a fourth of the state. I mean, there's nobody who represents more people than, except for statewide officials in the state of North Dakota. Are there other cities the size of Fargo who are still at large around the country? Are we really, or is Fargo really, really unique when it comes to at large?
Yeah, we are real unique. There are no other cities over 100,000 anymore. Portland, Oregon was, but they converted. And we are the only one left over 100,000 with a commission form with at large. So, yeah. And I think, it's indicative of the fact that neighborhoods with a city over 100,000 population would start to take on different concerns, different ideas, issues. So, yeah, I think it's just.
Yeah, we might not want to admit it, but Fargo's a city, right? Fargo's a city now.
Yeah.
And it's going through a lot of the transition that cities go through.
Exactly.
I think the move to a full-time mayor was a smart one. Josh Boucher is going to be the first full-time mayor to fill that position as full-time. Although previous mayors could probably say they put full-time into it.
Yeah.
It didn't get paid.
Wasn't recognized that way.
It's
to your point, Chad, I talked about Minot's move towards an at-large, and one of my problems was I thought we had too many council members for a community the size of Minot. Fargo's multiple times bigger than Minot, and I always thought it had too few. Your point about the number of people that each one of those commissioners represented was enormous. I'm probably the only of the Cass County Commission representing all of Cass County. Maybe a little bit of both. I don't know. I don't think any of our counties do wards or anything like that. But
doesn't Cass County have wards?
Yes.
Cass County? Okay.
Yeah.
I stand corrected. I stand corrected.
They have to live within a ward, but they're elected at large.
Oh.
Okay. That's the confusion. That's interesting.
And
Well,
it's been interesting to see that sometimes those county commissioners that are elected within a ward do not have a majority of the support within their ward. So,
They get elected at large. That is
yeah,
crazy.
yes.
yeah, that is interesting. That is fascinating. Well, it's an interesting proposal. Neither Chad or I could vote in the election. It doesn't. We don't live in Fargo. It doesn't affect us. But I think it's fascinating because wherever you live, process really matters. I mean, process can really. I mean, in addition to who you elect, process like the process that they operate when how they're elected really matters, and it really shapes how we're governed. And so you need a good process. This sounds like a good process to me, but I'm interested in watching the debate unfold around it. Arlette, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Oh, and maybe before you go, I don't know if your group has a Facebook page or a website or something, people who are interested in following along, getting more information, where can they go?
FargoWards.com.
FargoWards.com. That's easy. Thank you.
Thanks, Arlette.
Yep, thank you.
Today's program is sponsored by the North Dakota Association of Rural Electric Cooperatives, representing locally owned electric co-ops that power homes, farms, and businesses across rural North Dakota. Electric cooperatives are committed to reliable, affordable energy and strengthening the communities they serve. Learn more at ndarec.com. This episode is presented by Recovery Centers of Montana.
I woke up one day and didn't even know who I was anymore. And coming to Recovery Centers of Montana definitely changed my life. So you are not a lost cause. And I know it's scary to make a life change, but coming here will save your life.
Learn more by calling 701-401-3000.
That's 701-401-3000.
Hey, Plain Talk listeners, have something to say? Call or text Plain Talk with your questions, comments, or headlines you want us to cover.
Just dial 701-587-3141. Leave us your message or shoot us a text with your name and location, and you could be featured on an upcoming show.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and I am in Jamestown.
Hey, Rob and Chad. My name is Tony. I live in Grand Forks.
That's 701-587-3141.
Call us, text us, vent, praise.
We want you in the conversation. Thanks for being part of the show.
Now let's get back to today's episode.
Well, we just finished up with our friend Arlette Preston. Chad, I like the proposal. I think it's right for Fargo. I don't think it would be right for every city in North Dakota. Although I regret going to an at-large. I think Minot's problem was we had 14 members of the city council. That's too many.
Ridiculous.
But I think like 5 would be okay, elected from wards.
Yeah,
I think
even
that
if
would be a
Minot
good
just would have went
compromise.
1 per ward, I think you would have been in better shape rather than scrapping the wards. But I love the idea. I do think it creates a situation where people know who their go-to person is, because I know you said all legislators sort of respond equally or like whatever.
They
But
can,
they can,
and some do. I don't want to say all legislators.
A lot will say, if you're not from my district, Bismarck legislators will respond to Bismarck, Fargo to Fargo, but like
and that was kind of my point. Like if you're in Minot and you live in 5, but you're talking to somebody
3.
in 3,
yeah,
I don't think they worry about that too much.
Yeah, I would love it for Bismarck because I think we do have different needs in our different areas. I mean, I think about sort of the south, what would that be? The southeastern corner of the south side of Bismarck. I don't think gets the representation just because, I mean, people aren't living in those communities. They're not seeing what we need. So I would love it in Bismarck, but for sure, Fargo with being 140,000 people, absolutely they should do this thing. We don't have a vote in it, but I think it'd be good for the community.
Yeah, no, it's good for Fargo. Although maybe a little bit later on we should get somebody from the other side to kind of maybe former Mayor Mahoney to kind of talk about the other side of the issue a little bit. But I mean generally I think it's right for Fargo. Fargo's big enough for wards. It makes sense for them.
And I'm very confused by the weakens the mayor argument, because if the mayor now has veto power, that's more power than voting on everything. That's like saying the governor doesn't have any power when he has the veto pen. Like, I feel like this gives the mayor more power.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't have a vote, but that vote would be diluted anyway because you're adding more members to the council.
Right.
So instead of he still gets a vote in ties, so he gets to break ties, and then also he gets a vote or he gets a veto.
Yeah, and why would you care if you get to vote on something that's 6-1?
And also you're a full-time mayor now, with given more tasked with under this structure, as Arlette said. You're tasked with more administrative duties, which I didn't really. The one thing that gave me reservation was empowering more of the city administrator, where you started to say, this is an unelected person. I don't know how many times I have seen boards and commissions, whether at the city level, the county level, the state board of higher ed, nonprofit boards, where they have somebody who gets into that position and gets just way too big for their britches.
So the one
and pretty
thing that
soon
made
you
me
have the board or commission rubber stamping whatever that executive director or city administrator, whoever that person is in that position, and the board's just a rubber stamp for them, and they become the filter through which all the information from the city comes from. If you're going to have a full-time mayor, you don't need a strong city administrator.
Well, and I think she sort of explained that, made me feel a little more comfortable that the mayor and the city administrator would be working parallel. But that's then up to the mayor to not let that staff person get too powerful, right? I mean, Again, these are elected people responsible to the constituents. That I would hope that the mayor would keep that person in place.
Yeah. So I think generally it's going to be interesting to see what Fargo does. I feel like we need to maybe do some work on our laws around this too. Like,
what's crazy about this, Rob, is 2 sessions ago, they changed the law that a school bond can only be in the primary or the general, because they didn't like school districts playing games with doing a special election. And then on this thing, you have state law that says it has to be a special election. To me, they should pass a law just like they did on school bonds and say it has to be in the primary or it has to be in the general, because we want people to participate in these decisions.
And if we're worried about those ballots getting too crowded, I would worry about crowding the calendar with too many elections and confusing people. But B, also maybe we can elect fewer people too. I could get on that bandwagon. Like, do we need to elect the tax commissioner? I really like the current occupant of that office. I think he's a good guy. But that being said, do people pay attention to that race? I mean, what are the voters getting out of voting on that, when for the most part, most of them, they don't really set policy?
Hey,
so what are you voting for?
Let's get rid of the treasurer too. Sorry, Tom.
Yeah, sorry, Tom Beadle. Brian Croshus, the tax commissioner too. I would make those, maybe members of the governor's cabinet.
As long as we're doing this, the insurance commissioner, see you, Godfried.
Yeah. And the thing is, I like all three of those gentlemen.
Yep.
And I think they do a really good job. I also
think
that
probably
those
all
could
three
be...
get appointed by the governor to those jobs anyway.
Yeah. I think that's probably that probably Kelly Armstrong would probably have no problems appointing any of them to those jobs. But I think they should be appointed. Maybe we don't need them on the ballot. I always laugh when I get down to like the soil conservation district or voting for it, and they're never opposed. And you don't even know who. I work in politics professionally. I don't know who these people are. I don't really understand what they do. Why are we electing them?
Yep.
It doesn't make any sense.
We'd hate for our county commission to have the power to appoint a soil conservation district.
Heaven forbid. Heaven forbid. All right. Hey, let's talk about that military museum controversy in Bismarck.
Yeah.
So to set that up, if you hadn't, it's a planned 78 million, 70,000 square foot expansion of the Heritage Center. Now, I love the Heritage Center. I'll just put that front and center. This is a major, major project from it. But they were forced to abruptly stop construction this month. And it was essentially, the problem is they couldn't raise money from it. Now, the state had authorized $15 million from the SIF fund. That's the Strategic Investments and Improvements Fund. They also authorized a $20 million line of credit from the Bank of North Dakota. The organizers of the expansion needed to raise $38.8 million in private donations. They got about $4.1 million in pledges, with about only less than $1 million. It was about $800,000 actually collected. Now, despite that fundraising problem, they chose to start construction a year ago in July of 2025, and now they had to halt. And now the state's kind of in a position where we've broken ground and we've invested a lot into a project that there doesn't seem to be public support for. Although that surprises me. For something like that, you can't find I mean, I know
Right.
30. I mean, I don't mean to scoff that $38.8 million is not a lot of money. It's a lot of money. But for a veterans museum at the Heritage Center, you can't find some donors for that? That seems something's not adding up about that to me, Chad.
There is something really bizarre about the fact that they started construction with such a drop in the bucket. I mean, 10% of the necessary pledges, and you still decided to break ground and start the thing.
And it
I
wasn't
mean,
even, I mean, only 800,000 collected. And I
yeah,
know like a lot of them kind of rely on pledges, and
right.
that's probably a whole thing in the charitable giving space.
But Rob, it feels like they chose to break, and I'm saying they very generally because I don't know who actually made this decision, to choose to break the ground and then thinking, oh, then magically the pledges will start rolling in. That didn't happen. And now I guarantee there's going to be this group will go to the legislature and ask them to fund the rest
it's
of
the
this.
State Historical Society.
And that's always the fear on these kind of things when you have this public-private match. I, too, am absolutely astonished with something related to a military museum that they can't raise more than they have up to this point. Because, again, even counting pledges, it's 10%. Counting cash in the bank, it's like 2%, 3% of what they need. This is astonishingly poor performance, and the legislature is going to be left holding the bag.
Well, it makes me think, I mean, first of all, I want to say I support the project. All in favor of the project. When the legislature appropriated the funds, I was nodding my head saying, yeah, let's get something like that done. That sounds like a wonderful amenity. And again, I say that as somebody, I love the Heritage Center. And I think they do wonderful work. It's free. I mean, any member of the public can go in there. I don't know. We don't visit Bismarck very often without stopping. My kids love it. It's a great amenity. So a 70,000 foot expansion celebrating the history of our veterans and stuff, sign me up. I think it's great. I think there's some breakdown. It makes me wonder, because look, we just built the Theodore Roosevelt Library. Look at how successful their fundraising campaign was for that. There's not $38 million out there for this. There's a disconnect there.
Do you think there's donor fatigue? Like the Roosevelt folks are just better at this and we're able to, like, you just think that, I mean, there's people who've made lots of money, lots of companies who are very successful in North Dakota, and by and large, they seem to be pro-military. It's just astonishing to me. And maybe between now and January, people will start to step up into this space, but I still can't believe they broke ground without knowing where the money is going to come from. That just seems like
I
complete
suspect. Well,
incompetence.
that to me is I suspect that once the alarm bells sort of sound about this, they're going to find some money. Somebody's going to step up, write some checks. Now, that being said, I think maybe we should look at the process around this, where I like the idea of matching funds. I like the state coming in and saying, these are the state resources we're going to make available, but you need to match it with private donations. I'm worried. Do we know how much of the line of credit they used?
I don't know, but let's say they don't get those. If people don't start writing checks, what is the legislature supposed to do? They're going to have to find the money, because you're not going to just let this big hole in construction eyesore at the Heritage Center go on, right? I like you. I love the Heritage Center. We live 4 blocks from it. I mean, my kid loves the treehouse.
Yeah.
At the Heritage
So does
Center,
Cooper.
running around like maniacs.
We spent a lot of time there.
Yeah. So, but I mean, there's some leverage on the legislature here that's completely unfair because of the failure to raise these funds.
So so the entire $20 million line of credit from the state-owned Bank of North Dakota has been fully expended. So they have used the entire line of credit. The Bank of North Dakota is reporting that roughly $419,000 in interest has already accrued on that line of credit.
So half the money they've raised has gone to interest payments to the bank?
Pretty much. Half the money that they raise and actually have in hand has just gone to interest on the bank. So this has been poorly managed. I feel comfortable saying that. This should not have been done this way. They shouldn't have gotten the cart that far out in front of the horse. They shouldn't have been breaking ground until they had the money in hand. If it delays you a few years, then go out there, sound the alarm, say, listen, we can't break ground on this until we have more money in hand. Open up your checkbooks. This is a great thing. Get a campaign going. But
so who's on the state historical board?
That's
is it elected officials or is it private citizens? Look at how good you are at Google.
Yeah, I know. I'm Googling. Here we go. I got to pull it up. I should have looked up all this beforehand, but
we didn't even know we were going to talk about this 10 minutes ago. So I don't think you should blame yourself.
This was a late addition to the board. Oh.
I'm sure all of our listeners just think we have just all of this scripted out perfectly.
I don't think they understand how often we are.
What do we want to talk about today?
Yeah. So here, I'm looking that up, but it is, I think it's really been poorly managed. Let's see. The director of the State Historical Society is Bill Peterson. The deputy adjutant of the North Dakota National Guard, Brigadier General Jackie Huber. The executive director is Dale Lennon. The governor, okay, here's the governing state board. Bruce Dolezal, Twyla Baker, Jan Murtha, Alan Svains, Richard Stenberg, Amy Mossett, Rolf Sletton, Lacey Anderson, Matt Dunleavy, and Tyler Heyman. So those are some and then there are some statutory state members, Cody Schultz from Parks and Recreation, although he just moved to the Department of Corrections, Michael Howe, the Secretary of State, Ron Henke from the Department of Transportation, Sari Audie Coleman from Tourism, and Thomas Beadle, State Treasurer.
All right, guys, let's get it done. Let's get it done.
Yeah.
You mentioned the tourism director. Did you see the story about how much money the state did not take in from Canada this year? Was it $57 million less than expected, or some huge amount of money because of...
I'm sure that there are businesses that have closed, in our border communities. And not just, you think of Grand Forks, you think of Minot. And I know some people in Minot that have been hurting from just the Canadians just aren't here, our Canadian friends. It's hurt their businesses. And I'm sure you go into some of the small, you think of like Pembina, think of some of the Botno, some of these tourism, like nice things, our Canadian friends come down, enjoy amenities, they shop, they eat here in North Dakota, that has been hurt. But once again, you're not going to hear a lot about it from our federal delegation. They'll talk about it, but they're not really going to address the cause of it, which is that our president is a toddler and can't have an adult relationship as a world leader with other world leaders.
Yeah, he's not, and it's not even necessarily tariffs. You're exactly right. It's the way he treats our Canadian friends. That is why they're not coming down here.
That has been fundamentally damaged. America has, our ties with Canada are so important. America has never gone to war without Canada by our sides. They have been stalwart allies. And over the years, of course, disagreements over trade, disagreements over policy. Sure, they're a whole other country. They're allowed to disagree with us sometimes, but they are our friends. They are our allies here in North Dakota. They're our neighbors. And to see that this destroyed, I understand why Canadians feel the way they do, where they've started questioning, their willingness to be so, I don't want to say unquestioningly devoted, but how devoted they are to America and how much they treat us like leaders in the world. And they're now rethinking that along with a lot of our other allies around the world. And whose fault is that? I think it's pretty clear whose fault that is.
Absolutely.
That's really unfortunate. It has been hot. And during the break, you brought up something really interesting about youth sports and playing in some of this heat. You had some concerns about that.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting I love youth sports, man. There's nothing I enjoy more than going to watch my kid play baseball and sometimes coach him play baseball. But the last week, I found it really interesting that often in these conditions, there aren't real conversations that take place about the dangerous heat, right? We cancel if there's lightning, we cancel if there's a blizzard, but we don't really talk much about the other end of it. And obviously, hydrate your kids, you can make the decisions or whatever, but it just seems like up in North Dakota, because we're not used to this, we don't take this as seriously. Mind you, I'm going to a baseball game later this evening when it's going to be 100 degrees out and my kid's going to play and I'm still going to go for it. But it's an interesting sort of thing. There's a youth baseball tournament this weekend in Bismarck and they played the whole thing and it was, the heat index was 110, 115 degrees. It's I don't know. It's not something I hadn't really thought about until this week, to be honest.
Yeah. Obviously hot weather in summer sports is not new. I remember when I was playing football, 5th and 6th grade football, and I forget which year it was, but I remember when we first started, practices and stuff in the fall, it was over 100 degrees. I remember how hot it was because it was the first time I'd ever played football. And now I'm out here and I'm running and the coach had us running. And Chad, I remember specifically our coach at the time, this was the early 90s, saying that we shouldn't drink water during practice because it would make us weak or something. It'd be tougher if we didn't drink the water. That's colossally stupid and you should not do that. So I feel like we've gotten better, but part of me wonders, and obviously believe it or not, I love sports too. Huge baseball fan. And I'm all for people going out and having fun and being active and everything. But I think as a society, we put so much importance in this. And it obfuscates in the schools, it obfuscates academics. And I think even to a point, it obfuscates the safety of the kids themselves.
Yeah. And obviously adults have to make decisions and make sure decisions the right things are being done.
That's my argument, is I think a lot of times the adults have bad priorities. And I'm not saying like your son playing in the 100-degree heat or whatever. I would probably have my son play. It's hot
Right.
out. We'd be bringing lots of bottles of water and keeping a sharp eye out. I don't think there's anything wrong with playing through the heat, but I do think we have some crap priorities sometimes
Yeah.
when it comes to this
No,
stuff.
I agree. Speaking of good priorities, Rob, we had Corey Peterson on last week talking about the State Chamber Civics Bee, and that was last Friday, and I had the honor of being the game show host. And I just want to report back to you and the listeners. God, it was fun. God, these kids are smart. The kid who won it, Chalaka Ugobi from Minot, our Redeemers, also two-time state champion spelling bee winner.
Smart kid.
This kid talked about the need for more access to mental health services in rural North Dakota for adults. I mean, you want to talk about a real issue? So I just want to say how good this program is, how well the chamber did it. Michael Howe was there and gave some inspiring words at the beginning about how civic engagement is not showing up at a local meeting and screaming at people, but instead it's really sitting down and solving problems and digging in. And it was so much fun, Rob. So much
Michael
fun.
Howell's good on that stuff. I always enjoy his he addresses the citizenship ceremonies when we're swearing in new Americans, which I think is one of my favorite things that happens in America, is making more people Americans. I'm a firm believer that the world needs more Americans, and that always makes me so happy. And his comments down there, and we have a lot of state leaders, but Michael Howe's comments around that stuff, he specifically talks about the important, obviously as a Secretary of State, the importance of the franchise and voting and all of that stuff is really inspiring. I have a lot of respect for his view and his philosophy about that stuff.
And there was legislators who came and listened to it. I think there was 4 or 5 of them that were there. Thank you to them, because, I mean, part of leadership is showing up and supporting these students. I had a great conversation. Hey, I'm about to show you that I've become a pro at this. I had a great conversation with Eric Spencer, the head of the chamber, and Michael Howe before the event went. And, we weren't talking about policy. You know what we're talking about, Rob?
What?
Being dads.
Yeah.
Eric's kids are at home, are older. Michael just had a kid. I have a kid who's sort of in the middle, and we're talking about how great it is to be a dad. And I thought about that conversation when I read your column this morning about being a dad. I mean, I was laughing in my head about how you become a big old softy, but I thought it was a brilliant column.
I've always been a softie about that stuff. And honestly, like, my wife came up while I was writing that, and I was teared up a little bit, and she was like, "What's wrong?" And, the column, if you didn't read it, was about a play set that we have in the backyard. And, we've had it there for years, and it's worn now, and it's been through a lot of summers and a lot of winters. And sometimes Dad curses it because I have to mow around the stupid thing and I have to weed whack around it. And it's kind of a pain. In this time of year when I'm mowing, twice, sometimes 3 times a week with all the rain and everything we've been getting. It's kind of a pain, but it's been such a source of hearing my kids, out back there laughing, the neighbor kids, and sliding and climbing. And also this year, my oldest daughter doesn't live at home anymore. She hasn't for a while. She's living with her husband now. My middle daughter just graduated from high school. And although she still swings, and she goes out there in the middle of winter and swings, she loves this play set. She swings and sings. Our neighbors talk about, like, where's that singing coming from? Because at 11 o'clock at night, she's out there swinging on her swing. So she still loves it. But my son's been gone with my dad. He's been on an extended trip with my dad. It's been a wonderful trip. They've saw the Grand Canyon. He just sent me, he was in the Gulf of Mexico. He's in Biloxi. My dad's having a reunion of the 11th Armored Cavalry, which is what he served. He was a part of that during Vietnam. So he wanted my son to come with him and meet some of his veteran buddies and stuff. But my son's been gone for weeks and weeks. So for most of the summer, we haven't had kids playing on the play set. And now those dirt patches where their feet beat down the grass are growing in. And so I'm mowing it now, and I'm having to mow those patches. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm not probably that far from, all of those patches. My son's going to come back, and he's going to be going into 5th grade. So he still have a lot of time at home, but the time where I had little kids back there playing on that is coming to a close, and it made me really sad. And I wrote about it. And then we actually got a listener. We can end the show with some listener feedback, because we got some listener feedback about that column from Hal. He writes, "Good morning, Rob. In our backyard, we have a swing set, much like the one you described in your column of today, and it has been through all of the same iterations. I thought it was unaffordable and extravagant when my wife bought it and had it installed, but now, after all the joy that it has brought, and even though I am tasked with keeping down the weeds and grass that grow up around and through it, I know that I was so wrong. It has been and is wonderful. Below is a verse that I wrote a while back. Although it was not about the swing set, it mentions some of the same sentiments that you expressed in your column. Keep writing. That's from Hal. And I actually have his poem here. I should pull this up a little bit. So I printed it out and didn't print right. So here, I'm going to read it off my screen. He writes, "Oh, those little boys. I can agree because you see, we had kids way back when. They were great, but couldn't wait to grow up to become men. We saw them grow, it seemed slow, not knowing the time would end. Those little boys with lots of toys could drive us round the bend. Stepping hard on a matchbox car, a tennis racket on a bat or glove, we're not marred by a lasting scar as we remember them with love. All the woes and scattered clothes and bedrooms upside down cannot compare to the despair of not having them around. Today they're grown on their own, their kids keep them on their toes, and I say out loud, I'm so proud, so that everybody knows."
Hal, you're killing me, buddy. Rob, great column. Hal, great words.
So before Chad and I burst out into tears, what a maudlin way to end it. But that's kind of parents, right? Like, it's bittersweet. Like, if you do it right, you end up with kids who don't need you that much.
I always think about how can I love someone so much who irritates me so much at times, right? I mean, it's just, I often remind myself Evan's a 9-year-old boy. And sometimes he acts like a 9-year-old boy.
It's the worst, best job you could possibly have. Hey, if you want to send us feedback, 701-587-3141. You can send us a text message. You can leave a voicemail. Also, plaintalkindy.com. That's our YouTube page. Go there. You could follow the show. Subscribe if you go there. It's a great way to follow the show. Plain Talk Indy is our handle on social media. So X, Instagram, Facebook, all of them. We do updates. We post my columns there. We also put clips from the show there, new episodes. So if you want to follow us that way, be sure to do that. And thank you all so much for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. Don't threaten me with a good time.
Hi, I'm Megan Invick with Americans for Prosperity, North Dakota. One of the cornerstones of our Road to Opportunity agenda is tax relief, because North Dakotans deserve to keep more of what they earn. That's why we're advocating for the elimination of the state income tax, along with meaningful property tax relief tied to responsible local spending. Learn more about the Road to Opportunity and our plan to eliminate the state income tax at afpnd.org.
This episode is presented by Recovery Centers of Montana.
If you or someone you know is struggling, getting help shouldn't feel out of reach.
Recovery Centers of Montana offers care across 6 locations, including inpatient facilities and outpatient clinics.
Step away from the noise and focus on getting your life back on track.
Learn more by calling 701-401-3000.
That's 701-401-3000.
The North Dakota oil and natural gas industry works here, and works here, and here, and even works here by creating 60,000 jobs statewide and generating billions of tax dollars annually to support our infrastructure, flood protection projects, and our schools. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities.
Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org.